Hello, students, and welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about stress and illness. Let's talk about stress. Many people report being affected by stress. So some terminology I think that is important. You need to know what a stressor is. So a stressor is an event or condition that we view as threatening or challenging or overwhelming. Appraisal refers to deciding whether or not we view something as a stressor. And then a stress reaction refers to any emotional and physical response to the stressor, like rapid heartbeat, elevated cortisol levels, and crying. So stress refers to the process of appraising and responding to events which we consider threatening or challenging. Stressors are events and conditions that trigger our stress response because we perceive or appraise them as being challenging or threatening. There may be a spectrum of levels of intensity and persistence of stressors. We can also see stressors as falling into one of these three categories: a catastrophe, a significant life change, or chronic daily hassles. There might also be a fourth category here: the daily challenges of managing poverty or feeling powerless, being the target of injustice like discrimination or bullying or socioeconomic status, facing oppression as a society or as a subgroup, depending on where you live in the world. Acute versus chronic stress. Acute stress is a threat which comes on sudden and quick. It is managed by the SAM system, which we'll talk about here in a moment. And chronic stress is ongoing environmental demands. This is dealt with by the HPA axis, which we will talk about in a moment as well. And then eustress versus distress. Eustress is good stress, like when something good happens, like you throw a party, you get married. Can you think of an example of eustress? Then distress, on the other hand, are negative stressors, like getting fired or your final or something like that. Take a moment and reflect on the stressors in your own life. How do you juggle all of the different stressors you encounter every day? When encountering a sudden trauma or other stressor, our body acts to increase our resistance to threat and harm. In phase one, this is the fight or flight response. So the sympathetic nervous system is activated, pain is reduced, heart rate is increased, our adrenal gland produces norepinephrine and epinephrine. In phase two, the brain sends signals to the outer part of the adrenal glands to produce cortisol and other stress hormones. These focus us on planning adaptive coping strategies and resisting defeat by the stressor. And then this leads to phase three, which is known as exhaustion. These three phases are known as the GAS, or the General Adaptation Syndrome. So our stress response system defends, then it fatigues. So GAS is the three-stage process that describes the physiological changes the body goes through when under stress. Hans Selye, a medical doctor and researcher, came up with the theory of GAS. During an experiment with lab rats at McGill University in Montreal, he observed a series of physiological changes in the rats after they were exposed to stressful events. With additional research, Selye concluded that these changes were not an isolated case, but rather the typical response to stress. Selye identified three stages such as alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. Understanding these different responses and how they relate to each other may help you cope with stress. In the alarm stage, this refers to the initial symptoms the body experiences under stress. So this is the fight or flight response, which is physiological. The natural reaction prepares you to either flee or protect yourself in dangerous situations. Your heart rate increases, your adrenal gland releases cortisol, and you receive a boost of adrenaline, which increases energy. In the resistance stage, after the initial shock of the stressful event and having a fight or flight response, the body begins to repair itself. It releases a lower amount of cortisol, and your heart rate and blood pressure begin to normalize. Although your body enters this recovery phase, it remains on high alert for a while. If you overcome stress and the situation is no longer an issue, your body continues to repair itself until your hormone levels, heart rate, and blood pressure reach a pre-stress state. Some stressful situations continue for extended periods of time. If you don't resolve the stress and your body remains on high alert, it eventually adapts and learns how to live with a higher stress level. In this stage, the body goes through changes that you're unaware of in an attempt to cope with stress. Your body continues to secrete the stress hormones, and your blood pressure remains elevated. You may think you're managing stress well, but your body's physical response tells a different story. If the resistance stage continues for too long of a period without pauses to offset the effects of stress, this can lead to the exhaustion stage. Signs of the resistance stage include irritability, frustration, and difficulty concentrating. The exhaustion stage is the result of prolonged or chronic stress. Struggling with stress for long periods can drain your physical, emotional, and mental resources to the point where your body no longer has the strength to fight stress. You may give up or feel your situation is hopeless. Signs of exhaustion include fatigue, burnout, depression, anxiety, decreased stress tolerance. The physical effects of this stage also weaken your immune system and put you at risk for stress-related illnesses. Understanding the HPA and SAM systems. You experience stress. If the situation is judged as being stressful by the body, the hypothalamus is activated. The hypothalamus in the brain is in charge of the stress response. When a stress response is triggered, it sends signals to two other structures, the pituitary gland and the adrenal medulla. These short-term responses are produced by the fight or flight response via the sympathomedullary pathway, SAM. Long-term stress is regulated by the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system, or the HPA axis. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system. The stressor activates the hypothalamic pituitary axis. The hypothalamus stimulates the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland secretes adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. ACTH stimulates the adrenal glands to produce the hormone corticosteroid. Cortisol enables the body to maintain steady supplies of blood sugar. Adequate and steady blood sugar levels help a person to cope with prolonged stressor and help the body to return to normal. The adrenal cortex releases the stress hormones called cortisol. This has a number of functions, including releasing stored glucose from the liver for energy and controlling swelling after an injury. The immune system is suppressed while this happens. The sympathomedullary pathway, or SAM. The hypothalamus also activates the adrenal medulla. The adrenal medulla is part of the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is part of the peripheral nervous system that acts as a control system maintaining homeostasis in the body. These activities are generally performed without conscious control. The adrenal medulla secretes the hormone adrenaline. This hormone gets the body ready for a fight or flight response. Physiological reaction includes increased heart rate. Adrenaline leads to the arousal of the sympathetic nervous system and reduced activity in the parasympathetic nervous system. Adrenaline creates changes in the body, such as decreases in digestion and increases in sweating, pulse, and blood pressure. Once the threat is over, the parasympathetic branch takes control and brings the body back into a balanced state. No ill effects are experienced from short-term response to stress, and it further has survival value in an evolutionary context. So really the important thing to note is when you're under chronic stress, the HPA axis is in control. If you're experiencing brief or acute stress, the SAM system is activated. Repeated and prolonged stress may lead to a decline in neuron production, a decline in synaptic connections, suppression of the lymphocytes. These are the white blood cells that are used to fight off infections. And your DNA telomeres start to fray. These are the ends of your chromosomes. They shorten. This leads to slower tissue regeneration and early aging, and over long periods of time, death. A great example of this is the presidents of the United States. So these are before and after pictures of the presidents of the United States, and notice how much they've aged. I'm going to link you to a slideshow about this right now. The stress hormone known as cortisol helps our body respond to brief stress. Chronically, high cortisol levels damage the body. How do men and women vary in how they respond to stress? So in response to a stressor such as the death of a loved one, women may tend and befriend, which means they nurture themselves and others and bond together. The bonding hormone oxytocin may play a role in this bonding. Oxytocin is known as the cuddle hormone or the love hormone. Women show behavioral and neurological signs of becoming more empathic when under stress. Men, on the other hand, are more likely to socially withdraw and numb themselves with alcohol. Men are also more likely to become aggressive under stress. In either case, men's behavior and brain show less empathy and less tuning into others under stress. Personality and how it affects stress. We've talked about type A and type B personalities before. Type A was originally described not by personality psychologists, but by cardiologists who thought that people who showed such personalities were at greater risk of cardiovascular disease. Type B personality was conceived as a less intense personality type. A type C was later proposed as a predictor of cancer risk. There is now ample reason to doubt that these supposed personality types are in fact correlated with disease progression. There's also a type D personality, and this stands for distressed. It's described as a combination of being inhibited in social situations and tending to experience negative emotions. The concept of type D is distinct from types A, B, and C, which have been defined based on characteristics such as high or low assertiveness and hostility. But as with other types, researchers who have assessed traits associated with type D are interested in their potential connections to physical health. So it's important to note that accomplishing goals is healthy, but a compulsion to always be working while little time is spent smelling the flowers is not. Pessimism and heart disease. It can be helpful to realistically anticipate negative events that may happen and to plan how to prevent or cope with them. Pessimism refers to the assumption that negative outcomes will happen and often facing them by complaining and or giving up. Men who are generally pessimistic are more likely to develop heart disease within 10 years than optimists. Stress factor, perceived level of control. In this experiment, the left and middle rats below received shocks. The rat on the left was able to turn off the shocks for both rats. Which rat had the worst stress and health problems? Only the middle subordinate rat had increased ulcers. It is not the level of shock, but the level of control over the shock which created stress. Some stress is important. It keeps us alive. It keeps us motivated. This helps to explain how in elderly couples, when one of the partners dies, the other one dies soon after. Or it also helps to explain why people, when they go to nursing homes, tend to die rather quickly. It's because they are no longer in control of their lives, and having to give up that control often leads to death. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all I have for you today. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a fantastic day.